Today I'm talking about political matters. I'm wearing my politician hat today, seeing I'm now a councillor. So what I'd like to do is just run through some of the issues that you need to be aware of as a retiree, and I think this is an important year to be discussing these things because it's an election year. And I'm going to give you some tips on things that you can ask your political candidates about that may well have an impact on the quality of your retirement. So before we start, just usual disclosure, I'm no longer a financial advisor, but just in regards to anything you hear tonight, please don't treat this as personalised advice. Go and talk to somebody, an expert, one-to-one, if you want to know how the things we talk about might impact on you. So I'm going to start by looking at the Great New Zealand Super debate. And this is one of the things that people worry about, particularly as they're approaching retirement. There's that uncertainty around what are they going to do to NZ Super? Are they going to increase the age of entitlement? Are they going to bring in means testing? Will it still be there even? And especially for some of our younger people are asking that question, will they still have NZ Super by the time I retire? So I'm just going to talk to you around that debate, but I want to start with a proposition, and that is that if you are close to or in retirement, NZ Super is here to stay and you don't need to worry about it. So let me explain why I think that. So there's some arguments for raising the age of entitlement, and you often hear these arguments bandied around. The first one is that super is unaffordable for our economy. And that's because we have so many people now moving into retirement. And by 2073, we're expecting about 28% of our population will be over the age of 65. That's a problem because what's happening over time is that the number of working people to retirees is falling. And so by the 2060s, we're expecting there might only be 2 people working per retiree. Now that places a huge tax burden on those people that are working. People are living much longer in retirement, that adds to the cost. And if you look at what we spend, it's about 55 billion, which is as much as we spend on our total education system. It's a lot of money. But there are some counter arguments. And firstly, we don't really know how the future is going to play out. There's still a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's happening, for example, to immigration in the long term, and that may well alter that ratio of 2 working people to 1 non-working person. We don't know how our economy is going to perform. So there's so many unknowns that the argument is that we should just carry on as we are until we see how things pan out. And actually, if you did raise the age to 67, it's not going to save anything. The reason being that the longer you move out, the longer people are living. So in 2 years' time, the average life expectancy will be longer than it is today. So the best you can hope for is that maybe you might sort of tread water a bit on how much is being spent, but there certainly won't be any savings by increasing the age of entitlement. And it's a very emotive topic. And we've seen in France the riots in the streets when they talked about raising the age of entitlement from 62 to 64. And I think New Zealanders think that it's really a God-given right to be able to have super at 65 because you've paid tax all your working life. You don't want to have that taken away from you when that's what you've been working towards for so long. People don't retire at 65 though. A quarter of over 65s are still working. Put your hand up if you're over 65 and still working. Yeah, so there you go. I just want to talk about this unaffordability issue. So at the moment, NZ Super accounts for just over 5% of our GDP. Now that's a lot less than the average for OECD countries. So their average is about 7.7. And so while we will be spending more, and it might go up to just under 8% of GDP, that's not too far from what the OECD average is now. So by international standards, you could say that actually what we're spending on NZ Super is affordable. And here's a table that shows you the comparisons of the OECD countries. So down the left-hand side there, we've got France, Germany, Japan, US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, Australia. So you see France at the top spending 15% of GDP on their pensions, and New Zealand is down the bottom at 5%, just above Australia on 4%. So we've got a long way to go to catch up to those other OECD countries. What do our major political parties say about this? And I think it's really unfortunate that NZ Super is a bit of a political football. In my view, it shouldn't be. There should be certainty around NZ Super so that you can plan ahead and not be worried about what's going to happen to it. So Labour's view is that they will not change NZ Super. However, they're saying that they may well change income tax rates, and super is linked to the after-tax average income. So if that increases, your super will increase. For national, they won't be making any changes until 2037, and at that point they will start to increase the age of eligibility by 2 months a year. So really, for people in this room who are close to or in retirement, there's nothing going to change. What about means testing? That's not part of the conversation. And I think, again, it just reflects this attitude that Kiwis have, that it's their right to have NZ Super no matter what. If they've been paying taxes towards that, then they shouldn't be means tested. Let's look at what the Retirement Commission thinks, because they provide advice to government on retirement income policy. So they are arguing that NZ Super should stay as it is now. They're particularly worried about Maori and Pacific Island people who have a much lower life expectancy than Europeans do. So by upping the age, you're going to deprive them of, those extra couple of years of quality retirement. And women are another disadvantaged group because women don't tend to accumulate as much in their KiwiSaver accounts. They earn less, they take time off for children, work part-time. So their argument is that if you're going to start tinkering with the age of entitlement, you need a complex system to take all these things into account so no one's disadvantaged. And the Retirement Commission did a survey through the University of Otago last year, and what they found overwhelmingly is that New Zealanders want the age of entitlement to stay the same, and they're even willing to pay more in tax to achieve that objective. The Retirement Commissioner, Jane Wrightson, what does she say about it? Today, 40% of people aged 65 and over have virtually no other income besides NZ Super. That may be something you didn't know about before. And another 20% only have that and a little more. To provide good retirement outcomes, we need to maintain NZ Super at current settings and explore other mechanisms to support those where this is not enough on its own. So that's a very strong statement there. So in summary, will it become more unaffordable over the next 20 or 30 years? Probably. But really, right here and now, there are more important issues for you to be worried about. If you're going to worry about anything, don't worry about NZ Super, but perhaps start thinking about some of these other things I'm going to talk to you about now. So what are the other things that you need to think about? Firstly, housing. And we know that people's housing situation is a very big determinant of their quality of life in retirement. And what we're seeing is a drop in the rates of home ownership in retirees. I would estimate that somewhere between 30 and 40% of retirees are either renting or have a mortgage. And we know that NZ Super is barely enough to live on if you have a debt-free home. So for these people, it's really hard going. Even if you do own a home, there are issues because we know there's a shortage of suitable retirement housing. The 2-bedroom low-maintenance unit, there's not enough of them being built. And if you want to get into a retirement village, where I live in the Kapiti Coast, you have to wait 5 to 10 years on a waiting list to get into some of them. There is a huge shortage. And what we find is that in retirement, a lot of people are what we call asset rich and cash poor. Most of their wealth is tied up in their house, and there aren't enough options around for how to tap into that wealth without selling the home. And Ralph will talk to you more about that later on. Healthcare is another biggie, and we know, we hear about it just about every week in the news, I think, the shortage of GPs and nursing staff. And Te Whatu Ora is going through a lot of restructuring that's impacting on health availability, and we see huge waiting lists for hips, knees and cataracts. Those are the things that people claim on with their health insurance, hips, knees and cataracts, because they don't want to end up on a big long waiting list. And we see a lot of differences between geographic regions in terms of the availability and access to quality healthcare. And this is really important because if you're thinking about where you're going to live in retirement, nowadays you have to think about what is the access to healthcare in that area. So if you're moving to go to a warmer climate or to go and live next to your family, just think about that. Because, you know, in Kapiti, I know, for example, a lot of doctors have closed their books. You can't even, you have trouble finding a GP. And then if you do find one, you have to wait several weeks to get an appointment. So this is becoming a big factor in choosing where you live in retirement. There is a shortage of rest home beds. Now, the reason for this is it's becoming uneconomic to run rest homes. That's because rest homes get paid an amount per bed by the government. It's the rest home subsidy. There's a cap on it, and that cap is not high enough to allow rest homes to operate viably. And last year we lost about 1,200 beds, rest home beds, when in fact the demand is increasing significantly. And I'm sure you've all heard stories of older people who've gone to hospital, they can't come home because they're too ill, they need to find a rest home bed. And sometimes it takes quite a while to find somewhere to put them, and they may end up somewhere that's well away from their spouse or their family. So this is a very significant issue, and we know that probably around 25% of people spend at least some time in one of these facilities for a short time. So, next issue is employment. And you saw with a show of hands before, there's a lot of 65 and over who are working. A lot of them are working because they need to work, because NZ Super just isn't enough. But we still have a lot of age discrimination in the workplace. So some of these over 65s, while they might need to work, can't find work. There's very little support available for these people. Now there is a new scheme that started up on 1 July and it's called Flexi Wage. And through Flexi Wage, you can get payments from WINZ to cover training or towards your salary if you want to move into a different kind of job. Perhaps you've got health issues, you want to work part-time. So this is a scheme that helps facilitate that. It's only just started, and I'm not sure how well funded it is. But it's something to certainly keep in mind. The other areas to look at are social isolation, and I know from what I've seen, you know, working as a financial advisor for over 20 years, a lot of people stay at work because of that fear of social isolation when they retire. They're afraid that, you know, when they leave work, they're going to lose contact with their friends, they won't really have anyone to talk to, and they haven't made friends in their local community. Disability is a big one. And around 59% of people over the age of 65 have some form of disability. So that's something to factor into your thinking down the track. You know, what happens when you develop a disability? How are you going to get support for that? Digital literacy, if you're out of the workplace, how do you keep up to date with technology? It's not that easy. So you need to make the most of what's on offer. So have a look at Flexi Wage if you're still needing employment. And with digital literacy, there is some training available through the Digital Literacy Alliance Aotearoa. But really, a lot of these things are severely underfunded, and we need to put more pressure on government to do better in these areas. There's a rates rebate scheme, so hopefully you are all aware that you can get a rebate of up to $750 on your rates. That's means tested. You may get an accommodation supplement if you are renting or have a mortgage. Again, that's means tested. There's a disability allowance, Super Gold Card. We all know about the free travel with Super Gold Card, but did you know there's a whole host of other discounts you can obtain through your Gold Card? And if you go to the Office for Seniors website, you'll find a list, and it's quite a long one. So don't forget that when you go shopping, or even ask when you're buying something, do you have a Gold Card discount? You'll be surprised places do. And of course, there's the Community Services Card. There are some government programs that are designed to assist older people. Now, these don't apply to individuals, but they are community programs. So we have the Age Friendly Fund, run by the Office for Seniors, that provides financial assistance for local councils to make their communities age friendly. And for example, in Kapiti, where I'm a councillor, just last week we approved an age-friendly strategy for Kapiti. I'm not sure what the situation is in Wellington, but you do need to ask your local politicians here, what are you doing to make this an age-friendly community? Because one day you're going to need that age-friendly community. When you've got those disabilities, perhaps you've got mobility issues, hearing issues, whatever. And there is a Better Later Life Action Plan, which is a multi-agency program aimed to support older people. But again, all these things are severely underfunded. And when you think of the percentage of the population, we're looking at, maybe a third of our population being in this category. We put a lot of emphasis on young people and low-income families, but what about retirees? Who is speaking up for retirees? So key takeaways from me. First thing is relax, don't worry about NZ Super. It will be there for as long as you need it to be. But there are some important issues which I've outlined to you today, and I really think the government needs to step up in terms of solving some of these issues for older people. Make sure you take advantage of everything there is on offer. Do your homework, find out what's available, find out what help and assistance you can get, and make sure you're taking advantage of it.